Hi, I'm Janvi. I am currently pursuing my PhD in America in counseling psychology. I've done my master's in counseling psychology from India and worked as a therapist briefly before going to the US. Um, I have been interested in the Gita for many years now. I was very young when I started reading the Bhagavad Gita, and 13, 14 was when I started attending talks and reading my own versions. And now, being a therapist, I do feel like a lot of the Bhagavad Gita is uh, pretty much an ancient Indian way of doing therapy. In fact, it's a very old book, but the way the therapy is done in that, or the way conversation happens between Lord Krishna and Arjun, is pretty much a very modern, humanistic style of therapy, I believe. So today, I'm going to speak about how can you use the Bhagavad Gita as therapy in today's time. It's very difficult to find a therapist anywhere across the world. There's more need than there is supply. Even in places like America, there are wait lists of 200, 300 people on an average for a therapist. And a lot of times, by the time you get a therapist or you find a good fit with a therapist, it becomes um, too late, or you don't need it anymore, or you've already recovered from those very difficult phase by yourself, maybe not necessarily processing it the way you wanted to with a therapist. So it really helps to also be able to do something by yourself. It does not replace therapy, but it helps to cope during phases that might not be otherwise available. So before I begin, a lot of people also associate the Bhagavad Gita with religion, and I like how Alan Watts describes this, that religion in India or psychotherapy in India emerged in ancient Indian scriptures, which is considered to be religion in the West. But the way religion is understood in the West is very different than how it is understood in the East. And a lot of the philosophies that came out in the East were um, more of ways of life. So, dharma, which is the translation for religion, I don't think translates very well because dharma means duty, not necessarily an organized set of system and rituals. It's very open. It's a way of life, it's philosophy, in my opinion. So, I really like to explore the Bhagavad Gita from a very spiritual, also sometimes a very rational lens. So, the first thing is finding certain shlokas. Not the entire Gita might speak to all people, but certain shlokas can really be very, very, very helpful in certain phases of life. For students, for example, I always recommend one of the most well-known shlokas, which is in the second chapter, Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phal heturvu mate sangostva karmani, which means you have to focus only on your karma and not the outcome, because the outcome is anyways not in your hands. And this significantly helps in the thought of this helps in reducing the idea of anxiety, because anxiety is, according to the Encyclopedia of Mental Health, it's defined as the uneasiness, apprehension, and tension that stems from anticipating danger, which means you're anticipating a dangerous situation. You're anticipating that something bad is definitely happening, what they call an impending doom. Like something bad is going to happen, something bad is going to occur for sure. I don't know what bad's going to happen. So when a lot of people face anxiety right before an exam, the feeling is something bad's going to happen in the future. The outcome is going to be bad, and it's a constant feeling that goes on. And so shlok like karmanyavadhikaraste sort of helps reorganize that thought process and helps you focus just on your karma, which is your action, and not the outcome. And it also helps you learn to be within the flow of what Csikszentmihalyi was a Hungarian American psychologist who did research on happiness, and he found this concept called flow, which he said people like Michelangelo and a lot of those big musicians, sports players, a lot of times when they're into their art or sport or field, they're in a flow state. And that, according to him, is optimal happiness. So I think karma, similarly, if you're focused on your action, that makes you feel happy. It makes you feel the joy of doing what you're doing rather than worrying about the outcome. And anxiety takes up a significant amount of space. A lot of students, when they go for an exam, they say that I studied a lot, but I blanked out right before the paper, or I couldn't write anything in the paper because I was feeling anxious or something was happening. My heartbeat stopped. It felt like my palms were sweating and I did not know what to do. So, what happens at that time is your nervous system starts focusing on the anxiety and the stress response. And that's not the best state for you to be able to remember what you actually studied and produced. So that is one example of a shlok that I personally use a lot. Karmanyavadikaraste. Um, Another one is Indrayani Yada Kaman Sarvan Partha Manogatan Atmanyevatmanatushta Sthita Pragyastadochyate. This is more about control over senses. And because it's very easy to feel tempted to do a lot of the things, including food, everyday food, which in the Western world is called gluttony, right? Wanting to eat as much as possible, even though the next day you feel terrible about it in your stomach. This one is about control over senses. And this control over senses also includes control over, what um, Dr. Bijlani says, in terms of Sri Aurobindo speaking about the vitals. It's about a stronger emotional regulation of how you deal with things. So, personally, I think Gita is a beautiful conversation. Krishna is telling Arjun in lots of ways. And if you look at the Gita, it's not an advice giving, it's a dialogue. Arjun is asking, sorry, Krishna is asking Arjun what is going on in his mind. In the beginning, he processes a lot of those stresses, fears, guilt, grief that Arjun is experiencing. Then he does the process of offering different ideas, universal wisdom that's on his mind. So he talks about yoga, which is union between the mind, body, soul. He talks about different types: dhyan yoga, gyan yoga, dharma yoga, karma yoga, bhakti yoga. He also talks about sattva, rajas, tamas. He talks about gunatit, which is going beyond these three gunas. Gunas are um, sattva is going towards knowledge, rajas is in the middle, and tamas is going towards things that are leading you towards the devil. So it's similar to the concept of Sigmund Freud, which says id, ego, and superego. And Atma and Paramatma, if you're familiar with psychology, Jungian psychology speaks about the collective unconscious, which is similar to Paramatma, and um, the personal unconscious, which is Atma. So Lord Krishna offers a lot of options, and Arjun then decides eventually to fight. And so the decision of fighting is not an advice or a rule, but it's a path that Lord Krishna leads him towards through an in and out dialogue, which a lot of therapists do. If someone has PTSD or grief or heavy sense of guilt, people who escaped war, they have a survivor's guilt. So as a therapist, what I do is I try to help them lead towards the path of letting go and deciding to do their karma, their future. But for that, I first need to understand what their pain is. I can't just dismiss the part of pain and listening to them. So a lot of time goes in listening to why they feel guilty and then trying to move beyond those emotions through universal wisdom. Things like, well, you're not the only one. A lot of times when death happens, it's natural response for people to think and to be able to rationalize it. Whose fault is it? The easiest thing to do is it's my fault. I killed them. Even though the war happened and I did not kill them personally, but the first thing that we tend to do is come to an easy answer. And so I think these are some of the few things that I do and I use Gita for. I would recommend books like Gandhiji's Gita. In Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad, I got that Gita book for 7 rupees, I think, 7 or 10 rupees. But that was a beautiful book. One of the things he said was, I don't know if God is truth, but I know truth is God. And he describes the Gita from his perspective and he also describes the Gita to be that at every different phases of life, when he rereads the Gita, he gets a different understanding out of it. So it's helpful to read. Maybe take it one at a time. And because the Gita looks very fat, actually the original Gita is only 700 sloks. So if it's very difficult to read the fat book, It's okay if you just read the shlokas, which is basically 700 verses. It's not much. Just read the shlokas and the translation. All those long, long paragraphs that you get in those Gita books, they're just interpretations or they're just editions and comparisons from different books by the writer. So those don't have to be read necessarily. Gandhiji's Gita is such a thin, small book which you can actually read in one day. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments. I will keep a look. And thank you for listening.